you've got a no consequence environment in which crime has been allowed to fester. And I think the pendulum is swinging back.
This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. All right, we have an interview today on the show with someone who I respect quite a bit. I'm laughing because there's a context here. Federal Way Mayor Jim Ferrell. We've had him on the show. He's a Democrat. He is a very moderate Democrat, and he has been outspoken for the last 2 years on the insanity that's happening with criminal justice, quote unquote, reform, the rollback of the police pursuit law. I mean, he has been one of the politicians who's really been at the forefront of being unafraid of speaking back against his own party, what they've done. He's in Olympia fighting to get the police pursuit law restored. And so as you know, so it'll be June 6th. June 6th is when the initiative to restore reasonable police pursuits takes effect. So that was the initiative that Democrats kind of had no choice but to pass during the session. So June 6th. So we want to have Jim Ferrell on because he came out and he talked to Como News, I think it was last week, saying, look, like as soon as this police pursuit law takes effect, we want criminals to know that we are going to pursue in the city of Federal Way. We are going to track them down. Mayor Jim Ferrell, welcome back to Undivided.
Well, thank you for having me, Brandi.
Yeah, I think you're probably as excited as I am about the possibility of maybe having the new pursuit changes improve things a little bit. But before we get to that, you were on the news recently saying that crime is already kind of trending in the right direction in Federal Way.
Well, it was the day after I said that, we had, unfortunately, a series of very, very horrible crimes in our community. I was on Como News, I believe it was Tuesday, talking about there was a slight reduction of 5% of overall crime in the first quarter. And then the very next day, we had the shooting at the Winco IHOP parking lot in our community where a 2-year-old was killed tragically. And we're in the process of looking for that individual. And we've had, just that week, we had a couple more shootings. So we are doing everything we can to track down those people and hold them accountable. And I always say that, statistics it's really important to keep track of the numbers, but they're cold comfort to people that have been truly victimized. And so, we don't get lost for the forest for the trees. We're going to find those individuals that are responsible for these and track them down and hold them accountable.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that because I think too often, and what we've seen in Seattle too over the years, is some people in certain sectors of crime data, they're not reporting crime anymore. And so then it's like, oh, property theft went down or, something like that. It's like, no, it didn't. People just stopped calling the cops. But yeah, right. I saw the tragedy with the 2-year-old at the IHOP. I hadn't seen that it was in Federal Way. Do you think that's gang related and it was just an innocent 2-year-old?
Well, I have been on the phone and in, direct communication with the chief, the deputy chief, the commander, that's our PIO now, our public information officer, and really trying to drill into the details. This was an individual that had, the victim was a father who had 2 children in his car. He was in the parking lot of the IHOP, which they share a parking lot with the Winco grocery store. I'm in that grocery store all the time. They've got on-site security there, and it's at a very prominent location. So, and this was literally in the IHOP parking lot. So it's really difficult to tell. It's an ongoing investigation. They clearly knew who this person was, the shooters that were, that did this. The intended victim, the person they were actually aiming for, they missed, and they struck that 2-year-old child. That's just awful.
It is.
We're going to find that individual and that pulled the trigger and do everything we can. But I'll tell you this: it was done in a stolen car. That car that came to that IHOP and did that shooting. And I don't want to get too much into the details because we're still tracking it down, except to say that car was stolen.
Yeah.
Which makes it very difficult to track down if you don't have a license plate, a point of origin. But we'll figure it out. We've got some leads and some good evidence, and we're gonna be relentless. We're gonna move heaven and earth to track that down. It's just horrible.
Well, and you talk about stolen car, and that just speaks to something you've been fighting for, we've been fighting for. I think common sense people, in regard to police pursuits, is just saying, look, people aren't just using stolen vehicles to go on a joyride. They're using them to commit really dangerous crimes. We have to be able to pursue them. So you had to be happy that the initiative passed through the legislature.
Really, I was a little surprised because I have to tell you, Randy, I go to all these meetings, these regional meetings with mayors and elected officials and statewide, the Association of Washington Cities. And we kept hearing there's no appetite in Olympia to change the initiative law. And I just said, I don't care what your appetite is. This has to happen. So myself and the chief and other like-minded, policy individuals and elected officials kept knocking on that door. And then very, very late in the session, it was determined, I'm sure through polling, that the majority thought we better not have this on the ballot with us because this is going to pass overwhelmingly. Yeah. And I have to tell you, this has really been an unacceptable social experiment that started several years ago. Sure that certain reforms, needed to occur and make, we've instituted, audio recordings or audio and video recordings for our officers. And, there are certain things you have to have in place to make sure that rights are protected. But to unilaterally prevent officers from pursuing stolen cars, any kind of property crime, what happened is, as you're likely aware, the state of Washington became per capita the leading location for car theft in the nation in raw numbers. And think about this: with California, New York, Florida, Texas, we were number 4 in the country in raw numbers for car theft. So the numbers just took off exponentially. Now, not only do I expect, and I think they saw the writing on the wall, and they very wisely passed that. Yeah. And myself and the chief were down there for the hearing they had on there, and they ran the clock out and didn't allow the chief and I to testify because we had quite a number of statistics and information to provide. What I can tell you is, not only is the number going to drop, you're going to see the number, the bottom drop out of that number for car thefts, because the word will quickly get on the street that you can't just flee the police without consequence. And that's really what you've got. We're really between the essentially legalized crime and the de-enforcement of drugs, and the decriminalization of drugs, or the de facto, and the lack of pursuits. And the way that certain communities and counties deal with the homeless and allowing runaway encampments, you've got a no consequence environment in which crime has been allowed to fester. And I think the pendulum is swinging back.
Gosh, I hope you're right. And I do hope you're right on the car theft numbers, that we're going to see those plummet. So there are some jurisdictions, Seattle PD, for instance, Bellevue PD, I think King County Sheriff's Office, their pursuit policies internally are already just about as strict as the state law that was changed in 2021. What about the city of Federal Way? So June 6th, when that initiative becomes law, what changes in Federal Way, if anything?
If it's safe, we'll chase you. I mean, we're not, it's on. I mean, I have to, Brandi, I don't know if you heard about this, but our operations and maintenance facility several months ago was burglarized. We caught these guys in the yard. They had our stolen trailer in the yard where we keep all of our equipment. They had $250,000 worth of our tools. They rammed the gate and then jumped on the freeway, and we literally couldn't chase them. We just saw $250,000. That's bizarre beyond. That's really sort of otherworldly. I think the unintended consequences were so severe and really perpetuated injustices among all Washingtonians, because that increases the prices on a lot of things, and it just creates much more of a dangerous atmosphere. I can tell you as well, we had a number of businesses that were rammed with stolen cars, the front doors, and either the ATM was pulled out or whatever's pulled out, and then they leave with the merchandise in yet another stolen car. I think you're going to see that change. But we had another incident also several months ago, which if I had been allowed to testify at that hearing for the initiative, I would have told the legislators about. We had several young, juveniles who in one night broke over 69 windows of cars all throughout Federal Way. By this time, we brought in another crew. We're searching everywhere. We found him. Early morning hours, we found him at the crossings in the 348th McDonald's, and they were sitting in the parking lot, and we came upon them. Well, guess what they did? They got in their car and got on the freeway. And but we tracked him down. We got one of them at least. And last Friday, we referred charges. And you see, that's the thing about our police. We're just relentless.
Yeah.
And this is what I said on Como last week is, we're going to track you down. We're going to figure out who you are. And now it's going to be a lot easier. And you're going to see, when I was in the car theft unit at the King County Prosecutor's Office, it was called CTI. And the model was really identifying, key high impact offenders, high volume offenders, and remove them from the population, and your numbers go down dramatically.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to happen here.
Well, yeah, you're spot on. I mean, we see the Kia boys, terrorizing South King County, and they're responsible for all these high-profile incidents. You get them realizing that there's consequences now, and I think you're right. Mayor.
Yeah.
I like you, right?
Of course.
I'm a big Mayor Ferrell fan. Huge fan. Okay? As much as I can be a fan of a politician, I try to, not idolize them.
Thank you.
I haven't had you on since you endorsed Bob Ferguson. Now, I was going to let you off. For my viewers who might have a hard time reconciling the difficult positions you've taken on public safety and everything you just said in this interview up to this point, which is very sane.
Yep.
They're having a hard time reconciling that with an endorsement of a man who never spoke out about police pursuits until like a month ago. Right. Who has, not been a supporter, in my opinion, of law enforcement. Reconcile those two things for folks.
Well, I've known Bob for actually, I think I don't know if I told you this or not, but I've known Bob since we were in college together. We had a couple of, we were both poli-sci majors at the UW, personal friends. I know, so a lot of it has to do with, just be, candid with you, Brandi. It's a personal friendship. He also, during my King County prosecutor race, I know there was a lot of effort leaning on him to endorse my opponent. He didn't do so. In fact, he would call me up and go, okay, I'm hearing this. What about, and I would talk to him. I think the other thing is, in realpolitik, I do think that he's likely going to be the next governor of the state of Washington. He is a smart guy. He was a chess champion. He was a young person. And we actually had the same chess coach when we were much older. And I have to tell you that I think that Bob is persuadable on a number of things. We're going to give him an opportunity. That's not an endorsement in perpetuity. I'm hoping he'll do a good job. But I had more to do with the personal relationship, and he stayed out of my race, and I appreciated it. And so that's, he asked.
He stayed out of your race, though, Jim. He didn't. You're talking about your personal friendship. He might have stayed out, but he didn't endorse you.
Yeah, I knew he wouldn't. I knew he couldn't. This is, some of this is, Brandi, I try not to be too political, but some of this is very political. And yeah. And I think he's going to be the next governor, and I think that he's going to be an ally of Federal Way, of me. And I think when you've got, I'll be able to have an open channel with that governor and be able to talk to him in a very candid manner about what we need in the state of Washington.
So is it an endorsement of political expediency, Jim?
Oh, I don't know. I don't like the way that sounds. I endorsed him, and that's it. And so I was out, it was one of those things where, and he's the only one to ask me so far. Out of everybody, there's a great story about Tip O'Neill. Did you ever hear the story about Tip O'Neill when his first run? It's in the book Man of the House. And his first run, he was running for the state legislature in Massachusetts, which at the time was heavily controlled by the Republicans in the 30s. And he lost his first bid in 1936 for the state house. So a little while later, he goes across the street and he sees this little old lady that he's known for all of his life, and he's lamenting the fact that he lost. And he says, "Well, at least you voted for me." And she goes, "I didn't." And she goes, "Well, what do you?" Tip says, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well," the lady says, "You never asked me." And he says, "I've been mowing your yard for all these years, and I'm your neighbor." And he said, "Well," she said, "you should have asked." So Bob called me and he asked. And
So that's all it takes? So if Donald Trump calls you tomorrow and says, hey, I want your endorsement, you're going to be like, sure, Dom.
never.
Never. Oh, so that's different. Listen, Jim, I don't require purity of our guests, and I won't require purity of you. I think it's ridiculous. I don't care how good he is at chess. I don't think he belongs in the governor's office. And Jim, listen closely. Do you hear that? Shh, shh, shh. You listen? That's the sound of my broken heart. Almost like a knife to the chest. But yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. If he is governor, which I think there's a chance he might not be, I hope that you can have his ear. And I hope that you can talk some sense into him on some of these things, because he has fallen woefully short, in all seriousness, of standing up for public safety when it really mattered. Didn't speak out about police pursuits, didn't say jack while you were in Olympia fighting for to give police the ability to pursue suspects. So I just have such a hard time with it, because you're so common sense on public safety, and man, he's fallen short in that realm, Jim.
Well, I could say that there are a lot of, campaigns are rough business sometimes.
Yeah.
And 2 years ago, especially down toward the end, it got pretty rough. I felt a great deal of appreciation that Bob stayed out, and I think that has to do with it. And so I want you to know that.
That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends over at Future 42. You can turn your frustration into action by signing up for their newsletter, future42.org. They'll send you lots of ways to be able to get involved and do more than just be angry at your computer screen.